webinar, Supercharge Your Fuel Selling Operations. My name is Shannon, and I lead the energy marketing team here at DTN. We're super excited to talk to you today. But before we get into the presentation, I just want to quickly go over a few housekeeping items. The webinar will be recorded, and we'll be sending an email with a link to the rebroadcast in a day or so. You'll notice that all of you are muted. If you do have questions during the presentation, please type them into the chat window, which can be found on the lower right-hand side of your screen, and we'll get to as many questions as we can in our allotted time. So, without further ado, I'd like to introduce our presenters, Bill Olson and Shannon Mersney. Bill has been with DTN for 25 years, and prior to being a senior solution engineer, he was a regional sales manager for the West Coast for 15 years, and he reigns from his home office in Iowa. And Shannon, not to be outdone by Bill, has been with DTN for 26 years. He was a supplier, customer success manager for the last 4 years, and before that was a team lead and systems business analyst for TABS support and implementations. He just recently took a new role and is now the Senior Training and Implementation Specialist. So with that, I'm going to hand it over to Bill to get going.
Thank you, Shannon. Appreciate your time and appreciate everybody joining the call today. Just a quick sentence about our call today. You know, there's a lot of things going on in our markets that are causing issues with supply, demand, and we wanted to take this opportunity to discuss and show you some best practices of using tabs. And those are going to be involved with using tabs in terms of the enhanced credit and the forecast modules. So please, if there are any questions that you have, please put those in the chat and or reach out to either Shannon Mersney or I after the call, and we can most certainly discuss those with you. So with that to do, I'd like to pass this over to Shannon Mersney.
Okay. Hello, everybody. What I am going to talk about today, let me share my screen here. Can everybody see my screen? Oh, can you see it?
Yep, I can see it.
Okay, perfect. So the first thing I'll talk about today is tabs. For some of you that don't know what tabs is or don't use tabs, tabs is a way for you to control your liftings for your customers. The way that tabs works is that if a driver, the driver will go into the rack, and once they cart into that rack, at that point the terminal knows who they are. There could be a screen there when they cart in, asking them questions and things like that. But what the terminal will do, the terminal will send a transaction or a request to load to tabs over the internet, basically asking it to load. Now, in that transaction, there is a few pieces of information. There is the terminal that they're loading at. There is the supplier that they're loading from. There is a carrier code or a SCAT code. So there's just basic information there. And there's a consignee number or loading number. Sorry about that. And based off that information, tabs will look in its database and determine one of three things. Either they're authorized to load, and tabs will send back to the terminal an authorization number, or that they're authorized to load and which products they can lift. It'll send back an authorization number with which products, either product families or specific PIDEX codes, depending on the protocol that the terminal is actually communicating in. Or it's going to deny it for one reason or another. It could be that there could be a setup problem. It could be that they're out of product. It could be that they're out of credit. So one of those three is going to happen. But if they actually load, if they get an authorization, once they load, then once they cart out, the terminal is going to send the BOL into tabs. And what that's going to do is it's going to decrement any allocations that are in place, and then the BOL will be in tabs. So that all happens in real time. from a tabs perspective, there has to be some setup that is done. And I won't go into too much detail, and I'll kind of keep it at a high level here. But so the databases need to be set up into tabs in order to control or be able to get those BOLs and get those authorizations into tabs. So under the data management piece is where all the data setup is done. Of course, the first thing we talked about that needs to be set up is going to be the terminals. So the terminals where you're doing business at, those need to be set up. The products that those terminals are communicating, everything that's being done is done with PIDEX protocols. Both the protocols, the real-time transactions themselves, the PIDEX committee creates those standards and we use those standards, and also the products. They're all done with a PIDEX product code. They create the codes and the terminals and tabs uses those product codes. So whatever product codes those terminals are sending, they have to be set up in tabs also. And then they have to be assigned to those particular terminals. All of the loading numbers, or the consignee numbers as we call them, need to be set up in tabs also. So those need to be set up and they need to be assigned to those terminals in order for them to lift. Once all the database setup is done, then the allocation piece comes in. But what I will say is that based on those setups in the database, tabs does some extra checks when it's actually authorizing that load. So not only is it looking at the allocations, which I'll go over here in a second, it's also looking for those particular assignments. So when that transaction comes into tabs and it has that terminal and that consignee in there, it's also looking to make sure that that consignee number is associated with that terminal. If it's not associated with that terminal, then it's going to deny the load. It also does another check to make sure that when it's looking at the allocations, that those particular products that are being authorized are also assigned to the terminal. So there's a little bit of extra checks there. But once the databases are set up and everything's good there, especially with those checks, what can be done is you can set up allocations. Now, tabs has a few different ways of setting up allocations. So under this allocation tab, I'm just going to go into the manage section. And basically all of the allocations are done at a terminal or terminal group level or consignee group level. So if I just pick a terminal here and a customer, and from a standard practice, we usually like to say that the allocation point itself, in this case, is going to be at a terminal and then a consignee group or a sold to or an account level. In this case, this is just a demo account, so this is ABC Oil. And we can set up a couple different types of product a couple different allocations here. We can set them to open to buy, which means if any of the consignees in this particular group or account level, ABC Oil, a request for authorization comes in, if they're set open to buy, they're going to get authorized, and tabs is going to send back that authorization. They can be set to deny, which means for some reason or other you don't want them to load, and so they're going to get denied loading. And what tabs would do is send back a deny code to the terminal, letting them know that they're not authorized to lift. There's a one-time option. What that means is that they can lift one time, and then what happens is this flag gets turned on that authorization was used, and that customer won't be able to lift again until somebody manually comes out here and turns this off. This isn't used a lot in most cases. It's used for maybe high-risk customers or prepay customers or something like that, where they're prepaying for one load at a time, and this option can be used for that. And then we have our product allocations. Product allocations work by allocating by a product or product group level. And basically the way this works is you choose a product or product group that you actually want to allocate on. I'm just going to say gas at this point. give it a name. And then we have two different types of allocations that can be used, flat or hierarchical. Flat allocations are different periods that you can choose from that are all independent of each other. What I mean by that is if you select monthly and you give it a particular, you want to give them 500,000 gallons per month, that refreshes every single month, 500,000. You can do that. You activate that one period and that'll be the allocation. Now you can add extra periods here, tri-monthly, weekly, daily, and custom, but these are all independent of each other. So if I give them 20,000 per day, they can load up to 20,000 per day, but they still can't go over that monthly amount. Now, not all these periods have to be used. In this case, I'm just using monthly and daily. We also have scale percents on here, so you can, let them lift 200% of the daily, but still hold them tight at the monthly. And then we also have period hierarchical. This one works a little bit differently, where on the highest period, like in this case monthly, if I say 500,000, and then I activate the weekly, and I activate the daily, what that does is it actually calculates based off the highest period. What I mean by that is that it'll take that 500,000, divide it by the number of days in the month to get the daily allocation, and then times that by 7 to get the weekly. Again, you still have scale calculator on here also. So you can up those scales. But the one thing about the hierarchical is when you're managing allocations, it's a little bit easier to manage the hierarchical because when you're updating these allocations, say on a monthly basis, you're only updating the monthly amount, and then the weekly and daily are being calculated automatically. With the flat allocations, they're all independent of each other, so you have to manage all of the different periods. But the way TABS works is that it works off the most restrictive allocation in place. So what I mean by that is if the driver sends in the authorization, if the terminal sends in the request for loading, TABS will look at the allocations and look at all periods to determine whether they can lift or not. If any of these allocation amounts are 0 or below, they're not going to be able to lift. They're going to be out of this gas product, basically. So they're not going to get authorized for gas. Now, if they were authorized for diesel at the same time, they would only be authorized for diesel and not gas if this amount was 0 or below. TABS works with TABS doesn't actually send back the amount that they can lift. So as long as they have 1 gallon left in the allocation, they're going to be able to lift. So that's the allocation piece of it in a nutshell. But one thing about the product allocations from that is that if you set up one grade of gas or just gas itself, all products that you authorize, that you allocate at, have an allocation in place. So if you want your customer to be able to lift gas and diesel, then there has to be an allocation set up for gas and there has to be an allocation set up for diesel. If you only set one up for gas, that's all they're going to be able to lift. And that's just kind of a rule of thumb. Now there's some other things in TABS here that I'll go over just at a high level from there. So allocations, we have a mass edit functionality where you're not actually mass editing the allocation amounts themselves. What it allows you to do is either immediately or you can schedule a time where you can change a few pieces of the allocation. You can change the scale percent, or you can change the refresh date, or just a few of those things. You can't actually change the amount. Where this comes into play is, say, maybe there is a supply disruption or there's not enough inventory at the terminal. You can go ahead and take these scale percents down to 50%, and that will limit the amount that they can actually lift on that allocation. We have a mass delete function. We have a move function where it will allow you to create a backup terminal and then move allocation from a source terminal over to a backup terminal for a short period of time, like 1 day or 2 day, depending on the amount of the outage, or maybe there's some kind of maintenance or something like that, where you can move allocation from one terminal to another. We also within tabs for the allocations have global product overrides. What this allows you to do is create a GPO or a global product override for an allocation without actually changing the base allocation itself. A lot of times these allocations that are being created are based off a maybe historical lifting or maybe a contract amount or something like that. So in most cases, you don't want to go in and change the start amount, especially if it's based off something like that. You can change the scale percents and things like that, but the base amounts are based off a contract or something. What you can actually do is come in here and create a GPO and say for that particular terminal, Amarillo, for that ABC oil, I'm going to create a new GPO for gasoline. And I'm going to say, I'm going to allow the customer to load 10,000 more gallons starting today and ending tomorrow. And what it will do is it'll give them extra liftings, because in most cases, what's happening is that daily allocation has run out. Maybe it's over a weekend or something like that, where you just need to give them an extra load in order for them to lift to get through the weekend until that allocation actually refreshes. So this allows you to give them extra lifting without changing the actual allocation itself. There's some other things within tabs itself. We've got reporting. So any kind of reporting from tabs, all the setup data you can get reports on, all the allocations you can get reports on, things like that. So that's under our report section. We have alerts in tabs. So you can set up different alerts, whether you want to set up alerts for yourself internally. You want to be alerted of a product allocation. If it gets down below a certain percentage, you can do that. We've got credit alerts. We've got product alerts, GPO alerts. So alerts can be set up either internal to yourself, or they can be set up external to your customers, where they can be alerted if their particular allocations are going down below a certain percentage or something like that. So from an allocation perspective, I already talked about the product allocations themselves. So we also have credit allocations, and credit works a little bit differently than the product allocations do. When those customers are carting in and those transactions come into tabs, if say multiple trucks line up at different terminals for the same customer, and that authorization request comes in, it's going to look at the allocations and it's going to look at the amount that are there. And if it authorizes them all to load, if the amount is more than zero, like I said before. And then what's going to happen is, if say they only have one load left, say 4 trucks load at the same time, all those BOLs are going to come in and then decrement that same allocation. So they're going to go negative. If there's only one load left, they're basically going to go negative 3 loads. That's with product, so it only checks the amount. With our credit piece of it, we have basically 2 flavors of our credit allocations. We have our legacy credit, which works on gallons, and we have our enhanced credit module, which we'll be talking about mostly here, which actually works on a dollar amount. But with either credit that you use, it works a little bit differently than the product allocations. So as soon as the driver cards in, it goes and checks the credit allocation in place to make sure that the remaining amount is above 0. And if it is, it will authorize based off of that credit on the card in itself. And it will actually decrement it. It'll put basically a credit hold on there. And so what that's doing, like in the scenario before with just product allocations, if there's only one load left, and 4 trucks are lined up at different terminals and they all card in about the same time, the first one that cards in, that transaction is going to get tabs. Tabs is going to say authorize, and then a credit hold is going to be put on that credit allocation itself. The second driver that cards in, it's going, because of that credit hold, that amount actually went negative. So the second driver is going to get denied. And then the third driver and the fourth driver is going to get denied because just that first one would get authorized based off credit. So the difference there is that with product allocations, the allocations aren't actually decremented until the BOL comes in. With credit, there's a credit hold, so it's actually decremented on the card in. So again, our legacy credit is based off of number of gallons. So you put a number of gallons in the system in our credit, in the credit record, and when there's a decrement amount, say of 8,000 gallons, when they card in, 8,000 gallons is decremented from the credit record, and then when the BOL comes in, we readjust that credit record based on how many actually were lifted. The enhanced credit works a little bit differently. You actually put in a dollar amount of how much credit they actually have. There is a credit limit of 400,000 in this case, $400,000. And we have some extra customized fields in there that you can use. There's credit and debit fields that you can use. There's valued BOLs, orders, special liabilities, receivables, and then credit adjustments. And what that means is that this works that same way where when that driver goes into the rack, they card in. It comes and looks at the credit limit. And at this point, tabs or the credit enhanced credit module uses our fast track average prices. So it takes a spot market and figures out what the average price of gas and diesel is, and then gives that load an estimated value. So if the price of gas and diesel, just for example, is $2 a gallon, the average is $2 a gallon. When that driver first comes in, cards in, if the decrement amount is 5,000 gallons, what it's going to do is it's going to take that average price of gas and diesel of $2 a gallon times 5,000 gallons and give it a credit hold balance of 10,000 gallons, which if it started with 400,000 and there's a credit hold of 10,000, then the remaining balance down here is going to be 390. So they're going to be able to lift just fine. But where this comes into play is that when they actually load the truck, say they loaded gas, it's going to readjust based off of the actual gallons that they lifted and the price of gas. So if that price of gas is $2 a gallon, like I said, and they loaded 8,000 gallons, it's going to take that $2 per gallon of the average price for that particular spot market and give it an estimated load amount of $2 times 8, $16,000 in my head there a little bit, but it's 16,000. And so that is what's going to happen there is that's going to be put into the unprocessed BOL bucket. What that means, if it's unprocessed, that means the BOL has come into tabs and it's in tabs waiting for you to download. Now, once you download those BOLs out into your back office system, that amount gets moved into the in process, which means you've downloaded it, it's in your back office system, but you haven't yet invoiced your customer out. So what happens is this is actually updated by a feed from your back office system that feeds us credit limits and receivable amounts. So once you actually invoice that customer out, you would send us the receivables amount here. Now what this does is it takes all of these amounts, the credit limit, any other special columns that you have in place, all of the unprocessed BOLs, all of the in-process BOLs, your receivables, and then any credit hold balances to figure out what that remaining credit is based off of those prices. So again, you give this a dollar amount for a credit limit, and it uses the average fast track prices. Now those average fast track prices are updated once a day. They are editable. So if you want to actually change those prices, say they're way off from what you actually want to use, you can do that. But you have to remember that those are updated once a day. So if you want to edit it, you have to do it once a day if you want that changed every single day. So it's just an average price. We don't use your actual prices that you have for those products. We just use an average fast track price. But so that's the big difference of how enhanced credit works versus product. Okay, so that's the enhanced credit. So let me talk about the forecast module now. Now the forecast module, I have a few slides here. Here we go. So with our TABS forecasting module, basically, I've just got a few definitions here. The forecast module works on allocations. So basically an allocation is, TABS supports product allocations, lifting controls at the terminal. The allocations could be for a customer control liftings for a contracted amount. Allocations could be used to manage supply allocated a class of trade or something like that. The definition of a forecast is to predict or estimate the future event or trend. So what our forecast module does is it tries to estimate how much an allocation should be based off historical liftings. Now, there's lots of challenges forecasting wise for product allocations beyond just those historical liftings. I mean, there's seasons or weather, there's holidays, there's pricing, there's the economy, there's supply availability, competition, and weather. And so it kind of takes all of that into consideration. And I'll show you that here in a second. But basically, nobody wants to leave product on the table. It ensures that you're able to provide supply to meet your customers' needs. It needs to be manageable, which forecasting module is. It needs to be simple, and it needs to be understandable by all parties, and able to execute the forecasting strategy. Since it's based off the allocations, usually the forecasting strategy is the same as the allocation strategy. Basically, who can use the forecasting module? Operation schedulers, inventory accountants, supply managers, customers can see the forecasted amounts. Supply and exchange partners and sales representatives. And so basically the lifestyle, or the life cycle, I should say, not style, of a forecast is that if you start over here on the left, the trucks load at the terminal. That creates lifting history. Based off that lifting history, TABS then creates a forecast trend. That forecast trend is then used for a supply review, where internally you can see those allocations. And then it can also be used for customer review. So this can show on the allocation viewer, say you want to allocate 1 month out, 2 month out, something like that. Then those allocation or those forecasts can show on the allocation viewer to your customers, and then they can request changes to them. Now, once all of that piece of it is done, a final forecast is created. Then based off that final forecast, it actually creates or updates the existing allocations in place based off that forecast. What it will do on the last day of the month, it will update the allocations in place. It'll update the refresh amount. So then on the first day of the month, the refresh then becomes the start amount, and that's based off the forecast itself. So the forecast module actually creates and updates your current allocations that you have in place. So what do you need to actually use the forecast module within TABS? Well, you need historical lifting data. So if you've been using TABS already, there should be lifting history in there. So once it's turned on, we can use that existing lifting history. Or if it's a brand new terminal, we can actually load lifting history into TABS for our forecast module to use. Now you need to determine what you're forecasting on. What I mean by that is your allocation, the way your allocations are set up, whether it's flat or hierarchical, which periods you're using, you would determine that same thing for forecasting. You need the visibility or allocation viewer in order for participants or customers to have the ability to input to that process. And with that, they'll have a timely insight into that. And then you also need distribution of this decision making. In other words, empowerment at the right level. So the forecasting, basically, it's a process. You use data, seasonality, level of forecast, whether it's enforced or unenforced, things like that. But the forecasting review at the supply level and the customer level, where you can solicit those customer inputs. Once it's finalized, then the forecast becomes allocation. Now, the way that this is all set up in tabs, use this in tabs. Basically, the way this is set up is under our forecast module. First, I'll show you the configuration forecast, I guess. The way this is configured is it's configured by channel itself. As soon as this comes up, the way this is configured is by channel. So if I come into the details, this is where we configure it. But first, there's a configuration for the country itself. So in this case, United States, we're going to say we are forecasting 2 months out, and then an option whether to create zero amount allocations or do not create the allocations if that forecast is zero, or you can create using the current allocation limit. So that's just the first part of the configuration. The details itself, when configuring the forecast, is the same way you're going to be doing the allocations. So a lot of this configuration comes into play when it's a brand new allocation. So if it's a flat or a hierarchical allocation, which periods you want to the forecast module to create when it creates a new allocation, monthly, weekly, or daily, or depending on the type, what periods you have, what scale percents you want to create, whether you want the status active or unenforced, the allocation start time, the default weekly start day, and then the weights. So the way that the forecast is actually calculated is it takes the prior 3 months of lifting, those amounts, and looks at this forecasted monthly weight to determine what that average is and what the forecast is. So in this case, first month prior is a weight of 3, second month is 2, and the third month is 1. What that means is if each single month 10,000 gallons was actually lifted, this will take that 10,000 times 3, so 30,000 plus 20,000 plus 10,000, and figure out an average, and they will give it that forecast. So that's just the simple forecast calculation right there. It takes the previous 3 months based on the monthly weights and then creates an average off that. Now, we do have an option for seasonality in this case, and seasonality is just a calculation to get a seasonality percentage, basically. So basically, in this case, month X, which is the lifting amount from 12 months ago, minus month Y, which is the lifting amount from 13 months ago, divided by month Z, which is 15 months ago, to get a percentage. And then we calculate that forecasted amount from the prior 3 months and give it that and times it by that particular seasonality percentage in order to get an actual forecasted amount based off seasonality. And basically what's happened, so if something 12 months ago happened, maybe there's an event that happens every single year, maybe the Super Bowl, something like that happens where the amount of lifting is a lot higher, then you want to calculate that into your forecast. Maybe there was a hurricane 12 months previous or 13 months previous. It's going to use those lifting amount numbers in that seasonality index, basically, to create those forecasts. Now, there's some other validation in there where you can, if the forecast changes from month to month more than, like in this case, 10%, you're going to be notified. And there's going to be flags on those allocations itself. But with the setup here, you can also set different periods where these forecasts will be available. In this case, the customer review. The customer review would start on the first day of 1 month prior. So as soon as the first of the month, once that forecast is created, it's going to allow that forecast to show on the allocation viewer so your customers can see that. There's also alerts that can be sent out to your customers, letting them know that the allocation is available on the allocation viewer for them to see. And then any changes that they put through, the cutoff date for that in this case is the 24th of the month, 1 month prior. So once that's done and all those requests are in, once they put those changes in, you can either one of three things: accept them, change them and accept them, or deny that request if they want to change that forecast for that particular month. And then, of course, the day that it's finalized. Once it's finalized, it's final, and then the last day of the month, it's going to update the allocation itself. Now, to set up these forecasts, it's pretty easy. It's based off of the allocations. So if we add a new forecast, you do it the same way that you do allocations. You say you give it a terminal, you give it a product, gasoline, and the customer itself. And then you have a start month, in this case, April 1st, that's the next month. You have carryover months. Carryover months are important because if there is no lifting history for a particular terminal, when you're setting this up, then you can say carry over for 3 months and say give it a amount of 50,000. What that's going to do is it's going to create a forecast for the first 3 months of 50,000 gallons. Then once the end of those 3 months are over with, then those lifted amounts that it has built up over the 3 months is going to be used for the actual forecast calculation based off lifted amount instead of a monthly amount. And then once these are set up, the forecast goes into play, and then it'll create the allocations based on. Let's see here. Now, with these, like I was saying earlier, these forecasts can also show on the allocation viewer. So this is our demo allocation viewer. And as you can see, this is kind of a basic allocation viewer that shows the allocations and all that. But at the top, we actually have a forecast tab where the customers can come in here and see what their forecast is. In this particular case for April, they can see the proposed amount is 50,000. And in February, it was 16,000. So they can see the previous month there, or they can go to May and see what that amount's going to be. There isn't one for May yet. So what they can do is they can actually request a change from here. They can span this out and see what their historical liftings are within tabs, and then they can request a change. If they don't think 50,000 is enough, they can say they want that to be 60,000. They give their name, their phone number, their email, and any comments. And then when they submit this, you're going to get an alert letting you know that they requested a change to that forecast for April 2023. And then you can either, like I said, either accept it, change and accept it, or reject it. So it allows your customers to have input into their allocations, their future allocations, based off this forecast module. Let's see here. I think that's all that I have to go over today. Shannon, I don't know if you have any questions yet or anything like that.
We do. We have a few. So thanks to Bill and Shannon. And the first question we have is on authorization. If a customer or supplier does not have authorization, will it send back the reason why, or is a single refusal command?
So what it will do is tabs will send back a deny code. So all the deny codes are created by the PIDEX committee. So there's a whole list within tabs of what are the deny codes. So in our help center itself, under resources, we have deny and error codes. You can see all of these deny codes. So there's invalid seller ID. I mean, there's deny, no check where it's set to deny. So tabs will actually send back a deny code. And then how that actually renders at the terminal is up to that terminal automation system. So if they say just a deny 9 or they just say a deny, that's up to the terminal itself.
Okay. And then second question we have is, so they do have access to do everything in tabs, but they don't have access to change the daily, weekly, monthly to active or unenforced, etc. Should that be an option with other permissions?
It should, yes. And now within tabs itself, there are roles set up. And if those roles don't allow you to make updates, that's another thing. So it depends on your permissions within tabs, your login and your role that you have. But yeah, if you have access to do allocations, depending on the type of allocation, you should be able to change it to unenforced or anything like that. I would say if you're having an issue with that, call our support group. They're really good at it.
Okay. And then a few additional ones. So one, will enhanced credit show on allocation viewer?
It will. So either type of credit that you're using, either legacy or the enhanced credit, will show on there. So in the example that I was showing you earlier on our demo account, you can see that the enhanced credit does show there. As soon as this comes up, you can see right here, you got your credit name, you've got your credit limit, the receivables, you can see your credit adjustments, your unprocessed BOLs, in-process BOLs. So yeah, it does show on the allocation viewer if it's programmed to do that. You don't have to show it. It's up to you when you have an allocation viewer.
Okay. And is there an API to update the enhanced credit information, or is it all done through the ADM load file?
Right now, it's all done through the ADM load file. That is one thing that we have been working on throughout last year and this year, is we are updating a lot of those processes that we use today with ADM load to do through API. So that is something that we're actively working on. I don't know exactly when the credit piece, and usually it's ADM load, but when that ADM load piece for API is going to be done, I don't have we can check on that, but I don't know when that's going to be. But yeah, you will be able to do that through API at some point. Right now, just ADM load.
Okay. And then this is a two-pronged question. So how many total users can be on enhanced credit versus legacy credit? And then what is the benefit of enhanced over legacy?
So you can have as many users as you want in tabs, because tabs is all controlled by you basically. So you can set up as many users as you want. Now, what those users can actually do in tabs is another story. So if you give them different roles within tabs, say you want your credit department to have full access to all the credit records, you can set them up to have full access. Where maybe somebody in your marketing group, you only want to give them view only access, so you can do that. So that's completely up to you on how you want to set up your users and what access you want to give them. But you can have as many as you want. And what was the second part of that question?
So what is the benefit of enhanced credit over legacy credit?
Well, the benefit would be that it's using an estimated load based off of dollars. With the legacy credit, it's based off gallons, and it basically it works with a refresh period. So if you want to refresh that on a weekly basis, you set it up that way. The enhanced credit doesn't use any refresh. It gets updated when you send in your updates to that credit record. So whether you're sending in a credit limit update or a receivables update, it takes all of that information available from the credit limit to the receivables amount to the amount of that those loads are from the BOLs coming in, both the unprocessed and in-process BOLs. And it takes all that in order to calculate the credit limit that's remaining, but it's based off of dollars and an average rack price. So that's the biggest advantage and difference. It gives you a little bit more flexibility that way.
Okay. And that takes care of all of our questions. I want to thank everyone for joining, and a special thanks to Bill and Shannon for presenting. We appreciate all your time, and we will be sending out an email with the rebroadcast link in the next couple of days. Have a great rest of your day, everyone.